Biogas and biomethane could be key to Southeast Asia's energy future. With demand set to rise 60% by 2040, the International Energy Agency says they could meet a quarter of today's global gas needs. To discuss their potential, we are joined by Dieter Bellen of Roland Berger. So, Dieter, what scale of investment is needed to unlock biogas and biomethane's potential? Let's start with this.
So the International Energy Agency has indeed quantified that biomethane could meet a quarter of current global gas demand, or 1 trillion cubic meters. And just to put that into perspective, today only 0.2% of natural gas demand is coming from biomethane. In France, 3% as of early this year, and the country has set a target of 10% by 2030. Honestly, I don't think that we will meet the 25% global gas demand, despite biomethane's potential, and the reason is cost. Biomethane is significantly more expensive than natural gas, at least in most locations, and I don't think that is really going to change much. Without meaningful carbon taxes, natural gas will remain cheaper than natural gas, where you have massive economies of scale. Biomethane is much more challenging to really scale up, as you always have the complexity of feedstocks and the logistics of it. So although I'm very optimistic about the potential of biomethane, I don't think we'll reach the 25% unless there are very strong policy interventions like carbon taxes. And if we assume that biomethane is roughly double the price compared to natural gas, it would cost around $250 billion extra every year to have the 1 trillion cubic meters of biomethane, or the 25%. And that's a massive additional cost.
This is interesting. Despite the challenges that you've just mentioned, what drives the willingness to pay for these renewable gases?
So given the higher cost of biomethane compared to natural gas, it's mostly driven by mandates, incentives, or carbon prices. So for example, India has a mandate for transport fuel and domestic piped gas, starting at 1%, rising to 5%. In many countries, these policies are not only driven by decarbonization targets, but also, and actually often more importantly, by security of supply concerns and the government's desire to reduce imports of natural gas and instead leverage domestic biofeedstock. In Southeast Asia, there is at this stage a very limited willingness to pay for biomethane, given a lack of strong policies or carbon taxes in most countries. There are support measures in the region for biogas, typically in the form of a feed-in tariff, but not so much for biomethane yet. And hence, the willingness to pay for biomethane is quite limited in Southeast Asia. And we only see two segments in the region willing to pay for biomethane, at least in the short term. One is the power sector, especially in Singapore, and the other one is the maritime sector for bunkering via bio-LNG. And although it's a very nascent market, the bio-LNG for bunkering is expected to take off, driven by international mandates for shipping decarbonization. LNG is the cheapest way to decarbonize shipping, and bio-LNG can increasingly take a share in that bunkering market.
Can you expound on that, Dieter? How will this shape Southeast Asia's energy mix as demand rises?
So in the next few years, we expect that most of the demand for biomethane in the region will come from the power sector in Singapore, namely gas-based power plants, which is 95% of Singapore's power mix. So these gas-based power plants in Singapore, most of them are currently negotiating biomethane import volumes to bring biomethane into Singapore for blending in their power plants. The electricity coming out of that would then be considered as domestic renewable electricity, which is very scarce and valuable given Singapore's limited domestic renewable capacity. There is particular demand from data centers for that green power, especially as biomethane has been promoted as one of the preferred green energy pathways for the new data center capacity tender in Singapore. So in the next few years, most of the demand and the highest willingness to pay for biomethane in the region will be Singapore, especially for the power sector and the data center sector as the end customer of that power. Biogas and biomethane producers, as well as other players like palm oil companies, gas infrastructure players, etc., have been preparing for this opportunity and negotiating agreements to export to Singapore, either via LNG, CNG, or through pipeline. So the biggest developments will be this creation of a new biomethane market driven by Singapore with cross-border biomethane flows. And this is really exciting as it's a completely new market development with investment opportunities on feedstock, production, and transport side.
Well, we are looking forward to seeing how this turns out. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dieter.
Thank you very much.
Once again, that was Dieter Bellen, partner and head of Roland Berger's Energy and Sustainability Practice for Southeast Asia. For more news, visit asian-power.com.